The New Haven Clock Company operated out of New Haven, Connecticut from 1853 to 1960. Over the more than 1 century of its existence, the well-known clock company produced many varieties of table, wall, and mantel clocks as well as pocket watches. Around 1937 to 1939, the New Haven Clock Company also produced an early flip clock, which today is referred to as the New Haven flip clock. Recalling the historical events surrounding an antique flip clock can be fascinating, but in this case, the history of the factory building where the clocks were made can be just as interesting. The old brick factory building resides in New Haven, Connecticut, in an industrial area just outside of downtown New Haven. Without question, the New Haven Clock Company building, located on Hamilton, St. John, and Wallace Streets, has a long and colorful history, and today, perhaps a promising future. The old clock factory building over the years hosted such things as Kurt's Gay Bar, various strip clubs, including the Club International Strip Club that featured a glass swimming pool hanging from the ceiling, a motorcycle club, various genres of music concerts, an indoor skate park, oddball art galleries, as well as squatters. One thing I found interesting as a child of the 80s was that the building was used by rock band 38 Special in a music video for their hit song, Back Where You Belong. Unfortunately, in the early years, the New Haven Clock Company made glow-in-the-dark clock dials by painting them with self-luminous paint containing radium-226. Tragically, many women factory workers at other clock companies contracted severe radiation poisoning by radium-226 in the making of these glowing clock dials, suffering a rotting of the jaw now known as radium jaw. Several of these women bravely took a legal stance against the involved companies and the government, eventually securing new workers' rights. The book Radium Girls by Kate Moore covers this tragic moment in history very well. While the New Haven Clock Company did not carry the stigma of injuring their workers, the building still became contaminated with radium. After years of environmental studies, the building was accepted into Connecticut's Brownfield Site program. A brownfield site is a property for which the redevelopment or reuse may be complicated by the presence of any hazardous contaminant. The building was slated to enter the first stages of an estimated $6.6 million environmental remediation at the end of June 2018. So soon, the historic New Haven Clock Company building will get a new lease on life. On May 22, 2018, city leaders approved a deal allowing the redevelopment of the building into affordable housing apartments that will be known as the Clock Shop Lofts. Now on to the New Haven flip clocks. This video marks a first in the review of the New Haven flip clocks because to my knowledge they have seldom been pictured or reviewed together. Now, here in 2019, we're quite fortunate to have both clocks in Flip Clock Fan Studios. The New Haven Clock Company called the clock the New Haven Time Flip. In an advertisement it was also referred to as the Time at a Glance clock. But what we definitively know about the New Haven Time Flip remains limited. However, the consensus is that the clocks first appeared in 1937, and by 1939, an advertisement still described the clock as modern masterpiece by New Haven that gives you the time accurately and precisely, just as you would speak it. As you can see, there exist two distinct versions of the New Haven flip clock, the slightly larger and more common style known as the Stylus Timepiece, this name from the label typically attached on the bottom, and the other, the Perseus Numeral timepiece. The clock mechanism of the stylus is housed in a cylindrical glass tube which rests on an equally sized wooden framework or cradle. The cylinder and cradle are positioned between two arched wooden end pieces on either side, almost like bookends. The numerals are large and easily visible from a distance. The movement of the motor can be confirmed by a spinning flat circle flush with the right inner side of the clock that has an umbrella pattern. The whole assembly lies on a relatively thin, about 1/2 inch, flat wooden base. The wood is reportedly natural mahogany trimmed with white holly. Advertisement lists the dimensions as 7 3/4 inches wide, 3 3/4 inches high, and 3 3/4 inches deep. Yet today, when I measure, the clock is only 7 1/2 inches wide. Shrinkage of the wood surely would be the cause. The style number, or what we might call the model number, is stamped into a silver blank space on the painted metal identification plate, and it reads N.H.S. 611-247T. Also on this plate, one can see the various patent numbers and the identification of the clock as originating from the New Haven Clock Company, New Haven, Connecticut, USA, a building with which we are now much more acquainted. The second version of the New Haven flip clock, which is considerably harder to find, is the Perseus Numeral timepiece. In spite of a different name and look, the plate on the backs of these clocks contains the same style number as found on the Stylus Timepiece. There is also another variant of this clock with the nameplate bearing the stamp WS-611-473T and the designation Westinghouse Electric Supply Company, Hamilton Street, New Haven, Connecticut, USA. This clock also has the Perseus Numeral timepiece label on the bottom. Collectors who have had both in their possession assert that they are identical. It has been speculated that the New Haven Clock Company produced these alternately marked clocks to be distributed by Westinghouse. In the Perseus clocks, the entire mechanism and glass cylinder are exactly identical to the more common Stylus clock. Now that we have both versions in Flip Clock Fan Studios, it's clear that the mechanisms are identical. When we remove the left arch from the Stylus, we see that we are dealing with some extra space here. You will notice that the clocks have old-fashioned type plugs, as the original silk-wrapped cords from the 1930s have long since disintegrated. Beyond the identical clock mechanisms, there are some obvious substantial style differences between the clocks. The Stylus timepiece is slightly longer than the Perseus being about 6 1/4 inches wide compared to the 7.5-inch Stylus. And as you can see, the Perseus clock features circular rather than arched end pieces. The left-hand side is substantially more narrow than the right being thicker by necessity, as this is where the motor resides, as it does in the Stylus type. The circular end pieces, combined with the lack of resting cradle under the glass, creates an impression that the numbers are floating between the end pieces. The unbalanced look of early flip clocks of the 60s and 70s harken back to this Perseus New Haven flip clock, as you can see when we compare it to a 1960s Solari Udine Cifra 3. Even so, many collectors seem to prefer the look of the Stylus timepiece. Whatever their preference, antique clock collectors as well as fans of flip clocks universally seem to appreciate these historical clocks. To sum it up, the New Haven flip clock appeals to history buffs, collectors of antique clocks, as well as fanatics of flip clocks. Hard to find and expensive to own, this historical flip clock marks an interesting time in U.S. history as well as early flip clock history. And soon, the building where these two clocks were made will come to life again.